All right, so welcome back. So this is part two in our integumentary system lecture. And in this part, we're going to begin looking at the different specific layers of our epidermis. So we said in the previous part that our epidermis is the more superficial layer of our skin on top of the dermis, and that we start off at the bottom layer of the epidermis with round, alive cells, and we progress our way up and more superficially into kind of progressively more flat and squamous like cells that are losing their nucleus and ultimately die. Okay, so if we start at the very bottom, we have a layer called the stratum basal. Okay, so the stratum basal is our deepest layer. Okay, hence the term basal. So think of the term basal as like base or basement layer. This is the layer that is deepest in the epidermis. It's sometimes called the stratum germinativum, and this is the deepest layer in contact and touching kind of down near where the dermis is. Okay, so if we look at this layer here, we have all of the epidermis, this single layer down here, this is the stratum basal, and then it's in contact down here with what you see as the dermis, and we'll talk about the dermis later. Okay, so keep in mind, this is just one layer of cells. The cells here are round. The cells here are mitotically active. Okay, so they're undergoing mitosis. They're dividing. And you also find the melanocytes in this layer as well. So the melanocytes that we alluded to earlier, and that we'll talk about more in future parts of this lecture, you find them down here. Now, you also have something called epidermal ridges. Okay, and so epidermal ridges are these projections of the epidermis kind of down into the area of the dermis. So if we look here, we see all of our epidermis, and then we see this point that comes down. So we see it kind of come down here, we see it come down here, and it comes to this point. This whole region here is an epidermal ridge. When we talk about the dermis in a second, we'll talk about these other structures here called dermal papillae, and these two things overlap and serve to kind of keep the epidermis and dermis in contact with each other, and they also help to form what we know as our fingerprints. Okay. All right. So we move one layer superficial. Okay. And remember, every time if we say deep, superficial, orient yourself. So if we're saying deep, we're saying, closer to the dermis. If we're saying superficial, we're saying we're moving up closer to the external environment. Okay. So closer to the surface of the skin. So stratum spinosum, this is what's sometimes called the prickly layer. Okay. This is a layer of the epidermis that has multiple layers of cells, so anywhere from 8 to 10 rows or layers of keratinocytes. So most of these layers in here, this is all stratum spinosum here. Okay, and these contain what are called Langerhans cells. Okay, Langerhans cells. These Langerhans cells are what are called macrophages. Okay, and a macrophage is a type of a general type of immune cell. Okay, and so associated with our immune system, a macrophage will go into the tissue. So in this case, it go into the skin, and it will engulf and it will cellularly eat and bring in endocytose some type of foreign pathogen, dead cell, worn out cell, something like that. Okay, and so we'll see them here. We have them in the skin. We also have cells that are similar to this. We have some in the lung, and we call them dust cells or alveolar macrophages. We also have them in the liver, and we call them Kupffer cells. And then you have them in the brain as well, and there you call them microglia or microglial cells. Okay, so we have these cells throughout the body, but in general here in the skin, the Langerhans cells in the stratum spinosum, and they are an immune cell that's aiding in the protective qualities that the skin offers. Okay, all right. Our next cell layer in the epidermis is the stratum granulosum. Okay, this is called granulosum because it is the granular layer. All right, it has these small cytoplasmic granules called keratohyalin. And these are these large granules within the cytoplasm of these cells that give them this kind of more granular appearance. Okay, and this is anywhere from 2 to 3 all the way up to 5 layers or rows of keratinocytes. And this is the layer, because it's in the middle, right? So we did basal spinosum, and now we're getting to granulosum. We're kind of in the middle, and this is where we start to see some cells die off. So you see some cells that are dead, that have already started to die off, but you still see some that are alive kind of on the deeper side of the stratum granulosum. Okay, so here we are in the stratum granulosum here. All right, the next layer is called the stratum lucidum. Now, the term lucid means clear. This is a unique layer in the sense that it is not found everywhere in the skin. In other words, it's not found in the skin throughout the body. Okay, it is found only in areas of thick skin. Okay, only thick skin, and it contains a protein called eledin. And so, if you look at the image, the schematic to the left, you see the stratum lucidum layer here. It appears kind of clear. It's much lighter in color than all of the adjacent layers. Okay, so we said that it's found in thick skin. Okay, so thick compared to thin. So think about in your own body, where might you find skin that is thick, or what layer of or what region of your body do you think would it be beneficial to have skin that's thicker than other layers of skin? So maybe pause the video, think about that, and I'll go ahead and tell you. So we find thick skin in areas like the palms of the hands, the digits, the soles of the feet, and the digits of the feet as well. Okay, so this is where we find thick skin, and you get 5 layers of epidermis. Okay, so the stratum basal, spinosum, granulosum that we've already talked about, the stratum lucidum, plus the next one, stratum corneum. Okay, so stratum lucidum you do not find in areas of thin skin, and so thin skin is just everywhere else. So if we said thick skin was palms and hands and digits and soles of our feet and whatnot, then everywhere else would be thin skin. So think of the skin on your arms, or the skin on your trunk, or the skin on your back, or the skin on your legs, or the skin on your head and your face, right? All of these areas are thin skin, so they would have all of the epidermal layers except for this one, except for stratum lucidum. Okay, we'll see when we look at histology, there are ways that you can look at the histology and tell, even if you can't necessarily make out the stratum lucidum, there are ways that you can tell whether or not skin is a section of thick skin or whether it is a section of thin skin. Okay, all right, and then our last epidermal layer is called the stratum corneum. Okay, so the stratum corneum is the most superficial layer of our epidermis, and it is what is in contact with the external environment. Okay, on top of it, it would have those keratin filaments, those keratin proteins that are providing the waterproofing nature and resistant nature qualities to our skin. This is the thickest layer of our epidermis as well. So anywhere from 15 to 30 layers of keratinocytes. By this point in our epidermis, and hopefully you can tell by the schematic to the left, all of the cells are dead. Okay, they're all dead. They have no nucleus. So if you look at this histology section to the left, you see the stratum basal down here. You can make out dark nuclei. Okay, you can kind of make some out here, maybe in the stratum granulosum, but as you move up into the stratum lucidum and stratum corneum, you don't see any distinct nuclei. Okay, and that's because by this point, all the cells are dead. Okay, and so when you're looking at this stratum corneum, this is one way that you can look at a section of skin and try to begin to determine whether or not it's from a section of thick skin or whether it is a section of thin skin. Thick skin will have a very extremely thick stratum corneum, and the stratum corneum will usually be more than half of the overall thickness. Okay, so of the overall thickness of the epidermis, the stratum corneum is going to be more than half of it in thick skin. In thin skin, the stratum corneum is going to be a relatively minor part of the overall thickness. Okay, so this image to the left, this is probably a section of thick skin. So you can see the stratum corneum takes up a good chunk of the overall thickness. In this section here, this is probably an example of thin skin. Okay, now we said that the top layer stratum corneum is dead. The bottom layer stratum basal is brown. Is alive. I don't know where brown came from. So the stratum basal, as it is mitotically active, as it is continually producing these new cells, it's pushing these cells up, and so the cells on top that are dead, they have to go somewhere, right? They have to slough off. They have to fall off. And so there's this little tidbit of information that I'm sure you're happy to learn in the top corner, that most of the dust in your home, so when you look beside you right now as you're watching this video and you look at your bedside table or you look at your coffee table or something, the dust on that table, a lot of that is your own dead skin cells. Okay, so very gross, but it's just a natural part, right? We have this continually dividing process, these cells continually being made and pushed up into the more superficial layers of the epidermis. So the superficial layer, they have to go somewhere. And so it turns out that they just slough off and they go into our environment and they make up the dust that we find around our house. Okay, so we can look at these layers from superficial to deep or deep to superficial, and it's helpful to learn a mnemonic to help you remember the various layers. Okay, so here you can see the various layers of the epidermis. So when looking at the layers from superficial to deep, you have corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, basal. Now remember, if you have all 5 of these, corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, basal, where are you looking? What type of skin? You're looking at thick skin, right? If you lack which one, are you looking at thin skin? If you lack the stratum lucidum, you're looking at thin skin. Okay, so there's a nice mnemonic here, and this is the one that I learned in my studies, and this is the one that I prefer. So come, let's get sunburned. This is from superficial to deep. Come, corneum, let's lucidum, get granulosum, sun, spinosum, burned, basal. Okay, you can learn them superficial to deep. If you know them superficial to deep, by virtue, you know them deep to superficial. You can use this mnemonic. You can use another mnemonic. You don't have to use a mnemonic at all, but I find the mnemonics are helpful for things like this. Okay, and then with each layer, as you get to each one of these epidermal layers, think about the characteristics of it. How many layers are there? Are there other cell types here? Are there melanocytes here? Are there the Langerhans cells here? Are these cells alive? Are these cells dead? And kind of go about it that way instead of just trying to just memorize just the names of these layers. Okay, try to associate some different things with it. Okay, all right, we're gonna stop here and we'll pick up talking about thick and thin skin and some more details in our next part.